Hello, my Sutra friends. Time to gather around the Sutra campfire and let's talk about the rest of the 8 limbs of yoga. Let's dive on in. When last we left our heroes, we are thick into the 8 limbs of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. So the 8 limbs is kind of a system or an 8-step path that he lays out in the 2nd chapter of his book, in the 2nd pada. And so far we've looked at the first 2. We've looked at number 1, which is the yamas, which are restraints, like external observances that we observe in the world, like nonviolence and truthfulness and non-grasping and non-stealing and celibacy. Woo! And then the 2nd limb, we looked at the niyamas, which are these internal observances like cleanliness and contentment and tapas, intensity, and self-study, study of spiritual books, and surrender to God. So if you're interested in those, they are freaking awesome. You can check out my previous video where we really dove into those individually and deeply. But now, my friends, we have reached the 3rd limb. And this is where we get into some stuff that we've already probably encountered before. Let's look at it. (246). Ready? Asana is a comfortable, steady seat. Hallelujah, everybody. We've reached a word we know called asana, which means seat or sometimes posture. And so this sutra is easy. It's composed of 3 words: sthira, steadiness; sukham, sukha means sweet or easeful. You might have heard of the yoga pose sukhasana, a sweet seat. And then asanam. So sthira, sukham, asanam. And what this, I think we need to have a little context for this, because for us in our modern yoga world, we're so used to doing asana all the time. In fact, almost every pose you hear in Sanskrit has asana at the end of it. Gomukhasana, Sukhasana, Virasana, Virabhadrasana. All that asana means seat or posture. But back in Patanjali's day, everybody, this was 2,000 years ago or so, they weren't talking about doing your bow pose or your wheel pose or your warrior 2 pose. They were talking about meditation. So he's saying that your seat for meditation should be steady and comfortable. And I like this because Patanjali sometimes speaks in a little bit of dualities, right? He's kind of like, it needs to be this and this. In other words, if Patanjali just said, you know what, you just need to be comfortable. Get all the sukha you can, all of that sweetness, and just be easy. We'd all be like, okay, great. We're just going to watch Netflix all day and eat our popcorn and lay on the floor in Shavasana. Yay, no problem. But he doesn't. He says it also has to be steady. So there's the balance of opposites inherent in our asana practice. And if you think about, a non-meditative asana practice, like the postural practice that so many of us love and do, there's an invitation here, even though it's the context of this is, he's talking about sitting for meditation, but we can bring that into our postural practice and ask ourselves, am I steady in this pose? Am I easeful in this pose? So steady and easeful. Because if we're just grunting our way through a yoga practice and straining, we might take a hint from Patanjali and say, actually, that's not it. We need a quality of ease there. So we have to balance our easefulness and our steadiness. And yet, we don't just lie on the floor in a puddle in Shavasana in complete ease. There's also steadiness and effort required. So that balance of opposites is something we can take with us into our yoga practice. We all tend to veer towards one or the other. Like you might be someone who tries to type A yourself through the entire practice, or you might be someone who's always taking child's pose and trying to find ease and comfort. And we can kind of look at ourselves and say, okay, which quality am I really good at? And then which quality might I want to cultivate more of? Now, in terms of the context of this, we're talking about meditation, and he's saying you need a steady seat and an easeful seat. And one of the reasons that's so important is so that the asana doesn't distract our minds, right? So if I'm sitting in meditation and my knee is bugging me or I'm feeling really strained, how easy is it going to be for me to clear my mind? Not so easy. And if we remember, guys, the whole point of this entire text is to restrain the fluctuations of the mind stuff so that we can experience our true presence and true nature. Otherwise, we're caught up in the tangles of our mind, those little evil hamsters. And if I'm dwelling on my knee, it's like I have a little hamster in my mind going, your knee hurts, your knee hurts, your knee hurts. So one of the reasons why we want to cultivate ease in our body is so that we can sit and we can at least explore finding stillness in our mind. And so the yoga practice, in a way, all of those other postures we do, serves to let us just sit for a moment without being completely distracted. Sutra 247, a little bit more about posture. By lessening the natural tendency for restlessness and by meditating on the infinite, posture is mastered. So, and another translation, just because I think it's good to have a couple different translations in your head. Shearer says, they are mastered when all effort is relaxed and the mind is absorbed in the infinite. Here's Prabhavananda. Posture becomes firm and relaxed through control of the natural tendencies of the body and through meditation on the infinite. Well, we have it looks like there's a couple of components to this. One is lessening that natural tendency for restlessness. I kind of love that because, folks, I am a restless person. And I just love that Satchidananda, in his translation of this, said, hey, you know what? That is a natural tendency. I'm like, thank you. I don't feel like such a crazy person that it's hard for me to sit and be still. But by meditating on the infinite, posture is mattered. Or when the mind is absorbed into the infinite, then we have achieved that steady, comfortable seat. So a couple components. We know we have a steady, comfortable seat when our restlessness can subside and when we can meditate on the infinite, which is our soul, which is Purusha, which is letting go of all the thoughts and crazy emotions that we have. Sutra 248. Thereafter, once we have achieved our steady, comfortable seat, one is not disturbed by the dualities. Dualities? What does he mean, dualities? Well, dualities in the world is like everything is kind of opposing each other, right? We got fast and we got slow. Dualities, we have pleasure and we have pain. These are the dualities that the mind constructs, right? The world itself is one whole thing. There is no partitioning it out. There is no dividing it into little pieces. And yet our mind does this. Our mind always makes a spectrum. I'm taller, I'm shorter, I'm richer, I'm poorer, I'm healthier, I'm less healthy. I mean, we do it in every area of our lives, this nature of comparison. And these are the dualities. There's a bunch of them. But the ones that we often come back to in the Yoga Sutras are pleasure and pain, or pleasant and unpleasant. And, we're always attracted to something or averse to it. And that's kind of the push-pull that we do all the time in our lives at every single moment. And so what Patanjali is saying here is when you find your comfortable, steady seat, your mind is no longer disturbed by those dualities. It's no longer disturbed by the push and the pull that is usually happening all the time in our thoughts and in our emotions. Sutra 249. This one's a good one. That firm posture being acquired, that is, once we have our steady, comfortable seat, the movements of inhalation and exhalation should be controlled. This is pranayama. Pranayama! Here's another word that we all know. So this is the next limb. We have asana and then pranayama. So these are sequential in the sense that you need to kind of get the steady, comfortable seat before you do pranayama. And then prana, let's just break down this word a little bit. Prana is life force. It's kind of what makes us all alive. Yama means to restrain, but ayama means to kind of let go. So is it pranayama or is it pranayama? People do debate this. Is it about restraining the breath or is it about allowing the breath to be free? There is most people say restraining or controlling, but I just wanted to point out to you that it's given the way that Sanskrit is constructed, it could be pranayama or pranayama, and some people like to debate that. Either way, we are bringing our attention to the breath and to the movements of the inhalation and the exhalation. So y'all, let's do this thing. Let's have a little practice. So I want you to come and sit. in a comfortable, steady seat. So that means I'm sitting on a bolster right now. You could sit on a block, you could sit on a bolster, you could sit on a chair. I want you to find a position where your mind will not be disturbed by the dualities or by that niggling pain in your hip. So make yourself as comfortable as possible so that you can have an upright spine and your body can also stay relaxed. Because that's like getting us halfway there, right? And once you have found that nice position, just let your hands rest where they want to, palms down or palms up. And then let's close your eyes. And first, just tune into the movements of your breath. And there are a million ways, you guys, to control the movements of your breath. We have lots of pranayama techniques, but we're just going to be super simple. So what you're going to do is after you've kind of settled into the feeling of your breath, you'll inhale for your own internal count of 4, and then exhale for your own internal count of 4. And that's it, and repeat. And I'm not going to give you the counts because I want you to be able to honor kind of the tempo of your own breath. So you can count as slowly or as quickly as you need in order to maintain steady easefulness in your body. So pranayama should never create anxiety or tension. Instead, it should help us drop deeper within ourselves. And if your attention wanders from your breath, just bring it back. So if that natural restlessness starts to emerge, then come back to your counting and come back to the sensation of your breath. Take one more round. And after your next exhale, let the counting go. Allow your breath to settle into a natural rhythm. Might be very subtle. And sense how you feel. When you're ready, let your eyes flutter open. Sutra 250. So in this sutra, Patanjali goes just a little bit further with pranayama. He says, the modifications of the life breath are either external, internal, or stationary. They are to be regulated by space, time, and number, and are either long or short. Okay, so what they're basically talking about is that you can be inhaling, you can be exhaling, or you can be holding your breath. And you can either have long duration or short duration, right? So basically just outlining different ways you might control your breath. So there weren't a ton, I think, of complex pranayama practices back in this time. I'm sure there were some, but people got really into pranayama too later on in the yoga kind of history. In Tantra, there's like Nadi Shodhana pranayama and pranayama that does like all these energetic practices in your body and relates to the chakras and this energetic system. Back here with Patanjali, basically we're just talking about the breath, and it can be in, it could be out, it could be stopped, and it could be long, and it could be short, and you can change the duration and how many times you do it. So let's try something just playing a little bit with that breath retention. So now that we've tried just inhaling for 4 and exhaling for 4, what I'll ask you to do in this next little round is explore what the retention gives you. Now again, if any anxiety or tension crops up, let it go. Just return to your natural breath. Pranayama really should be easeful. It actually should help you to settle and get quieter. So if it's hyping you up, then that's just not the intention of this particular kind of pranayama practice. So what we'll do is we'll inhale for 4, hold for 2, exhale for 4. And if it's comfortable, hold for 2. Then as you do it, if you find, oh, hey, I can hold for 3 or hold for 4, then eventually we work our way to inhaling for 4, hold for 4, exhaling for 4, hold out for 4. Again, tension free. So let's give it a try. We'll just start with inhaling 4, hold 2, exhaling 4, hold 2. So take a nice tall seat again. Let your face relax, let your jaw relax, relax your eyes. Turn your attention inwards. Let your pelvis be nice and heavy and your spine nice and tall. Sense your natural breath. And take one more natural, easy breath. And then begin your counting. So you'll inhale for a nice, easy count for 4. At the top, you'll hold for 2, like a little suspension. And then exhale for 4. And if it's comfortable, you can add a hold for 2 after the exhale as well. And then carry on in your own time. And if your body is feeling super easeful with this, you might increase your count. So you might even inhale for 5 and exhale for 5, or you might increase the count of your hold so that you're holding for 4 counts rather than just 2. And 2 more rounds. And after your final exhale or final hold, let it go, return to your natural breath, and sense the quality of your presence and the quality of your mind. And go ahead and let your eyes open. Just notice, what did that, first of all, what did just that brief practice, a couple of minutes, how did that change your experience of yourself and the noisiness of your mind? And also, what was the quality of the retentions? What did that give you? Sometimes that retention or I like the word suspension actually because it implies a little bit less holding and just a little bit more floating. So that suspension where you're not breathing, usually we're breathing all the time, right? We're always in this tidal flow. So when we pause and we're not, there's a kind of inner stillness that can sometimes emerge or result from the suspending of the breath. It's like our attention kind of settles inwards into this still point because we're so rarely still. All right, Sutra 251. There is a fourth kind of pranayama that occurs during concentration on an internal or external object. Well, that's a little bit vague, I think. Prabhavananda says the fourth kind of pranayama is the stoppage of the breath, which is caused by concentration upon external or internal objects. The fourth kind of pranayama takes us beyond the domain of inner and outer. So I think there's a couple ways that people are kind of interpreting this, this particular sutra. But one, I've experienced too, when I'm focusing on something, outside of myself or inside of myself, like a sensation or an image or something outside, the breath can get really, really subtle, like super subtle. And so that could be potentially what they're alluding to, is that almost it's like the breath is barely happening, right? We're barely breathing, and it's because we're focused on something else, and the body is so quiet and still that it doesn't need a lot of breath. I'm not jogging or anything, right? So the breath naturally becomes like super quiet and easeful. So it's like when you're in Shavasana and you almost stop breathing because the body is so quiet. So that could be one way to interpret this sutra. Shearer says the fourth kind of pranayama takes us beyond the domain of inner and outer, which could also mean it takes us beyond this sort of like movement in and out of the breath to something else entirely, almost like an energetic quietude, right? So a couple different ways we might recognize that sutra in our practice. Sutra 252. As a result, the veil over the inner light is destroyed. So, our inner light, we could think of that as our soul, as Purusha. And this could be saying, like, as a result of this pranayama practice, what obscures that inner light is removed. So that obstacle, which, remember Sutra 1.2, our thoughts and emotions are all kind of these distractions from that inner light or that inner, our inner self. So when we practice this kind of pranayama and things get quiet, naturally thoughts and emotions start to dissipate, start to be a little bit softened and quieted, and then the inner light emerges, which is the connection to our soul or Purusha. Sutra 253. And the mind becomes fit for concentration. So when we do this practice, we find our steady, comfortable seat, right? We sit, we control and regulate the breathing. We focus on an internal or external object. We practice our breath control. Then when the mind is quieted, then we become fit for the next step. So these are a little bit progressive, these limbs. You know how I said at the beginning that these 8 limbs are kind of like the limbs of the tree and you don't have to do them in order? Well, these ones are kind of sequential because it's saying that in order to become fit for concentration, which is our next limb, we kind of have to quiet the body and quiet the mind. And pranayama, controlling the breath, helps us get there. Don't we know that? Don't we automatically take 5 deep breaths when we're really pissed off as a way of trying to calm and self-soothe and self-regulate? Sutra 254. Okay. When the senses withdraw themselves from the objects and imitate, as it were, the nature of the mind stuff, this is Pratyahara. Okay, so Pratyahara is sense withdrawal. Now, I just want you to cast your minds back to that little exercise we just did where we quieted ourselves down, right? When you did those breathing exercises, wouldn't you say that you were a little less attuned out here and a little bit more attuned inside? So the senses are sight, hearing, taste, touch, whatever the other one is. Smell, there we go. These are our senses, right? And sense objects are the things out here that stimulate the senses. And when we're kind of in the world, we're all grabby about that, right? Oh, look, a beautiful sunset. Oh, look, I'd like the coffee. Oh, look, I smell cake and I want it, right? There's things that we want. We're tuned into them and we're heightened to them. And when we practice pranayama and settle, the senses naturally withdraw, which means they become a little less out here looking around for everything, and they pull in. We become quiet. They settle down. And you experience this too at the end of a yoga class. Like at the end of a yoga class, you're less like ready to go out and just get all the things you need from the world, right? We're a little bit more peaceful inside of ourselves. So Pratyahara is the withdrawal of the senses, and that's the next limb. (255) Then follows supreme mastery over the senses. Because aren't the senses usually in control? I need coffee, I need sex, I need banana bread with chocolate chips, right? The senses usually are dictating where we go. In fact, there is a story that I'd like to share with you about a chariot. So I want you to envision, if you will, a bunch of horses that are yoked into a chariot, right? We got our reins and we got our charioteer. So the horses in this image, in this metaphor, are the senses. And left to their own devices, let's say that the charioteer isn't directing them. That's kind of like our mind. If our mind isn't directing our senses, the horses run everywhere, right? There's no reining them in. But when we have the mind controlling them, then we can direct them where we want them to go. But it takes somebody being aware and holding the reins in order to direct the senses appropriately. Otherwise, they just go after whatever they want. They're like, I want more carrots. I'm going to eat all that hay, right? But no, we rein them in. And then in this metaphor, the passenger is your soul. So the charioteer might take him anywhere, but it's really the passenger, the soul, that needs to call the shots. So part of this mastery over the senses is giving us more autonomy within ourselves. Because remember, if we're not like out chasing everything that's yummy, we're more calm. We're less driven by the external world for making us feel fulfilled and happy, and we're more settled in ourselves, which is really where contentment and peace comes from. We've finished Pada 2. What? In the middle of the 8 limbs, Patanjali goes ahead and says, this is the end of chapter 2, and now we're entering chapter 3. What gives? Well, let's take a closer look. So chapter 2 is the portion on practice, sadhana practice. It's what we do. It's how we practice. Chapter 3, or Pada 3, is the chapter on attainments. Attainments, or accomplishments, powers, progressing, powers, expansion. These are just different translations for the word vibhuti. So attainments, powers, progressing, powers, accomplishments, expansion. So we've left a chapter which is about practice, and we've entered a chapter about attainments or accomplishments or powers. Interesting. Right in the middle of the 8 limbs. So what that tells us, everybody, is that these last 3 limbs of the Ashtanga Yoga, the last 3 limbs aren't as related to practice as much as they are related to accomplishments or powers or expansion, to name some of these translations. So there's a slight different focus. Up till now we've been practicing, and now there's a sense that these accomplishments are also something that requires a little bit of divine intervention to get, right? Expansion and powers, it's kind of like we can practice all we want, but this is where we have attainments. This is where it's kind of like the next level of things starts to happen. Okay, so let's take a look inside. Sutra 3:1. Dharana is the binding of the mind to one place, object, or idea. So this is the next limb. Dharana, binding the mind. This is concentration, right? He said, hey, you have to make the mind fit for concentration. Well, then we have sense withdrawal, and now here's the next step. We're binding our mind to one thing. Well, folks, this sounds a lot like meditation to me, right? So when we sit and we meditate on one thing, we're binding our mind there. So that's what this limb is. Sutra 3:2. Dhyana, so we had dharana, now we have dhyana, is the continuous flow of cognition towards that object. So that's the next limb. So here's the difference between the two of them. One is just binding, one is being able to do it for a long time. So if you think about the way our minds usually work, like how long can you sit and actually stay focused on one thing? Usually we're able to do it for a little while, and then our mind wanders. And then we're like, oh shoot, I just forgot that I was concentrating on that, and then we bring our mind back, right? So it's kind of like if you turn a faucet on and it drips, that's kind of like what our concentration is. It's like there, and then it's kind of gone, and then we keep, bringing it back time and again. So this limb says when you can do that focus for a long time, and some of you may have experienced this in some of your meditation practices, where you can keep your attention there, that continuous steadiness is dhyana. Sutra 3.3, the last limb of yoga. Are you ready? Samadhi is the same meditation where there is the shining of the object alone as if devoid of form. I'm going to read you another translation by Prabhavananda. When in meditation, the true nature of the object shines forth, not distorted by the mind of the perceiver, that is absorption, samadhi. Okay, samadhi is utter absorption. It's where the mind isn't filtering what you're perceiving. So here's the thing. Most of the time when we're going through our lives, right, our mind is filtering everything we experience around us through the layers, through memory, through its sense of self. These are like the layers of the mind. It's always relating what we're experiencing to what's happened before, right? That's the nature of it. So very rarely do we have an absolute experience of our environment without that filtering process, without the lens of the mind imposing itself in between us and our experience. In samadhi, we have quieted the mind so much that just that thing, whether it's an external object of concentration or internal, just that thing is there. Our mind, we are just absolutely in the isness of our isness. The mind has no commentary to make. And so we're in pure awareness. And that is samadhi. That is yoga. All right, I'm just going to go through a couple more of these sutras because they're all kind of related to this. So I'm going to read them at once. So 3.4 says, the practice of these three, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, the last three limbs, upon one object is called samyama. Okay, great. So we have the name of that, samyama. By the mastery, this is 3.5, by the mastery of samyama comes the light of knowledge. And remember, for Patanjali, the light of knowledge is the illumination of who the true self is. Yogaschitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the restraint of the fluctuation of the mind stuff, because then we reside in our true nature and see ourself. Otherwise, we think all the stuff in our mind is the self. Right? That's right from the beginning of the Yoga Sutras. So, by the mastery of samyama comes the light of knowledge. So when we practice dharana, dhyana, samadhi, when we meditate, illumination of the true nature of reality comes. 3.6, it is a practice to be accomplished in stages. Thank goodness I'm not supposed to get there all at once. Keep working, everybody. And then these three, this is 3.7, these three, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, are more internal than the preceding 5 limbs. Well, that makes sense. We kind of talked about this, right? So the first limb, yama, is how we are in the world. Niyama is how we are with ourselves. Then asana, pranayama, pratyahara. Those are the first 5 limbs. Dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, they're more internal than those. Well, that makes sense because these are kind of about being in the world and then our physical body and then working with our breath. And now here we're talking about the subtle nature of the self in meditation. A little bit more internal. 3.8, even these are external to the seedless samadhi. So let me just explain what that means. Or what I think it means. So when I have a focus that I'm meditating on, and don't be confused, sometimes we use the breath as the focus for our meditation. You don't have to confuse that with pranayama. You can also use the breath as the focus, but it might be an internal light. In the first pod, he gave us a bunch of things we could focus on. The light of a great soul, our subtle body senses, all these things can all be things that we focus on for meditation. But when we have something that we're focusing on for meditation, we're still focusing on that thing. Remember? And he said samadhi is when that thing just shines as it is, so without the filtering of your mind. But even better than that would be as if you had nothing to focus on and you were just pure awareness. And that would be seedless samadhi. So most of us humans need something to anchor our mind to keep it busy. Let me tell you a story. Imagine an elephant walking through a bazaar. If that elephant is going to be grabbing everything, it's like our mind. That elephant is picking up things and looking at them and sticking them in his mouth. He's like interested in everything. His trunk is like our mind. It's crazy. But if you give that elephant a stick, he'll just hold on to that stick. And this is like our minds. When we have a seed to focus on, It's like that stick. It anchors us in there. We're like focused on that one thing. Otherwise, our mind roams all over the place. So most of us need that. But if you could be the elephant that just walked through the bazaar and wasn't tempted or interested in anything, that would be even better. Seedless samadhi is when we don't even need that one thing. We can just rest in pure awareness. Okay, just a couple of more sutras, and then we are going to be complete with this part of it. All right. The impressions which normally arise, this is 3.9. The impressions that normally arise are made to disappear by the appearance of suppressive efforts, which in turn create new mental modifications. Oh, the moment of conjunction of mind and new modifications is nirodha parinama. So if I'm focusing on one thing, I'm meditating, and I start thinking about like my bike trip that I'm going on, that comes up, and then I go, oh, and I deliberately go, no, I'm not going to think about that. I'm coming over here. So there's an effort to restrain the fluctuations of the mind, but that effort to restrain the fluctuations of the mind actually creates new mental modifications, new vrittis in my head. Whoa! But still, he's saying that's still good to do. That is one form. That is called nirodha parinama. And so, yes, for most of us, when you find you meditate, you're focusing on one thing, you have little hamster thoughts that come up and you go, shh, hamsters. They go away, and then you return to one focusedness, but there's still effort involved, right? So that's kind of like one stage, is when we still have the effort to restrain all that stuff that's coming up. The flow of nirodha parinama becomes steady through habit. So practice, my friends. Got to practice, and it'll get better. And then finally, last one for today, 3.11. When there is a decline in distractedness, an appearance of one-pointedness, then comes samadhi parinama, development in samadhi. So when those things no longer arise, when the distractions naturally are gone, that is a new level. So we have level 1 in our meditation, where those thoughts arise and we go, hush, I'm coming back to my thing, right? You guys know this one? And then eventually, if you practice enough, you'll reach another level where even those don't come up as much. And that's the direction we're going. All right, you guys, that concludes our 8 limbs. Can you believe it? We made it. We went through Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. And in the course of that, we left chapter 2 on practice and we entered chapter 3 on accomplishments. And we can see how these are accomplishments when we can start to study the mind and be a little bit less compulsive about grabbing onto every little idea or thought that's out there. That is an accomplishment. That is an attainment. That is a rising of powers, if you will. So there we go. If you have thoughts about this, please enter it into the comments below. I always love to hear from you guys and hear like what you're working on, what you think. And if you like this, please subscribe for more tips. I'd love to have you as part of the community and be able to stay in touch. All right, yours in yoga, everybody. See you on the mat.